After 20 years in state care, a young man received a key to a forgotten property. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a puzzle left by the grandmother he thought had abandoned him. And what he discovered there would unravel the entire story of his life. If you've ever felt like a piece of your own story was missing, or that the world had already decided who you were, then I need you to listen to this. Hit that subscribe button and stick with me, because this isn't just about my past. It's about how any of us can find our way back to a home we never knew we had. The day I turned 21 was the day I legally ceased to exist, at least as far as the state of New York was concerned. For 2 decades, I was Leo Vance, ward number 734. I was a file in a cabinet, a line item in a budget, a bed in a series of dormitories that smelled of industrial cleaner and quiet desperation. Then, on a Tuesday in October, I was just Leo. No number, no file, no bed. I was standing on the cracked pavement in front of the Northwood Group Home, the last stop on my tour of institutional childhood, holding a single, sad-looking cardboard box. It contained everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book someone had left behind years ago, a toothbrush, and a small stack of papers that officially declared me an adult, and therefore someone else's problem. The air was cold, sharp with the promise of a winter I had no plan for. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray. It felt appropriate. The director, a man named Mr. Harris, whose face I can only remember as a permanent wince, had shaken my hand with the enthusiasm of someone handling a dirty rag. "Good luck out there, son," he'd said, his eyes already looking past me to the next piece of paperwork on his desk. And that was it. 20 years, condensed into a limp handshake and a generic farewell. I had $400 in my pocket, a transitional stipend meant to last until I found a job and a place to live. In the city, that was a joke. It was maybe a week if I was lucky. I was standing there, a ghost haunting the edge of my own life, when a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. It was a modest, sensible sedan, the kind that blends into any parking lot. The window rolled down, and a woman with tired, kind eyes peered out. "Leo?" I didn't recognize her at first. Then it clicked. Ms. Albright, my last social worker, the one who handled the final stages of my aging out process. I thought I was done with her, with all of them. "I was hoping I'd catch you," she said, gesturing to the passenger seat. "Get in for a minute, it's cold." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to just walk away, to sever the final thread connecting me to that life. But she had an expression on her face I hadn't seen before. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't professional duty. It was something else, something heavy. I got in the car. The inside was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She turned down the radio, which had been playing softly, and faced me. "There's one last thing," she said, her voice low. "This was left in your file. The instructions were very specific. It wasn't to be given to you until your 21st birthday, no sooner." She reached into a tote bag on the back seat and pulled out a small rectangular box, not much bigger than a book. It was old, made of dark, polished wood, but it was grimy with age. She handed it to me. It had weight. I turned it over in my hands. There was no lock, just a simple brass clasp. "What is it?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow. "It was deposited with the agency the same week you were," she explained, choosing her words carefully. "By a law firm. There was a letter with it, stipulating the terms. We were to hold it. That's all the file says." I looked from the box to her face. The questions were piling up so fast in my head I couldn't get one out. My hands were trembling slightly as I fumbled with the clasp. It sprung open with a soft click. The inside was lined with faded velvet, the color of a deep bruise. Nestled in the center were three things. The first was a key. It was heavy, iron, and ornate, the kind you see in movies about castles and dungeons. It was rusted in places, but the teeth were sharp and complex. The second was a document, folded into a small, thick square and yellowed with age. I carefully unfolded it. It was a property deed. The paper was brittle, the ink faded to a brownish gray. The name on it was Ilara Vance, my grandmother. The property was listed as 14 Sparrow Creek Lane, in a township I'd never heard of, somewhere upstate. And the third item was a small, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax stamp that had long ago crumbled, leaving only a faint, indistinct impression. My name, Leo, was written on the front in a looping, elegant script that felt like a message from another century. Ilara Vance, I whispered, the name feeling foreign and familiar at the same time. The official story, the one I'd been told 100 times, was simple. My parents died in a car accident when I was a baby. My grandmother, my only living relative, had surrendered me to the state and disappeared. She didn't want me. That was the bedrock of my identity. I was the boy who wasn't wanted. Miss Albright sighed, a long, weary sound. Leo, I have to give you this, too. She handed me a crisp, modern envelope, a stark contrast to the ancient contents of the box. It was from a company called Pioneer Development. This came to the office last month, addressed to the estate of Ilara Vance, care of you. Our legal department opened it. It's a final notice. I ripped it open. It was a demand letter, full of dense, threatening legal jargon. It said the property at 14 Sparrow Creek Lane was 20 years delinquent on its taxes. The total, with penalties and interest, was a staggering number: $57,000. Pioneer Development had purchased the tax lien from the county. The letter was an ultimatum. Pay the full amount within 30 days, or they would take possession of the property. 30 days. I looked at the date. The letter was 3 weeks old. I had a week. I laughed. It was a raw, ugly sound. So this is a joke? They give me a key to a place I can't have? A place that belonged to the woman who threw me away? Leo, listen to me, Miss Albright said, her voice firm but gentle. My advice, as your former caseworker and just as a person, is to walk away. Let them have the property. It's a ruin, from what I can gather. It's a debt you can't possibly pay. You have $400 and the rest of your life. Don't start it by chasing a ghost and a debt. Take the stipend, get a room somewhere, find a job. Start fresh, please. It was good advice. It was the only sensible advice. But my fingers were wrapped around the cold, heavy iron of the key. It felt less like an object and more like a question. A question that had been waiting 20 years for me to ask it. The woman who threw me away, had she? Or was there another story? For the first time, it occurred to me that the official version might not be the only one. This box, this key, it wasn't the act of someone who wanted to disappear without a trace. It was the act of someone who wanted to be found. I looked at Miss Albright, at her worried face. "Where is Sparrow Creek?" I asked. Her shoulders slumped. She knew she'd lost. She pulled out her phone and tapped on a map. "It's a long way from here," she said softly. "A very long way." The bus ride was a descent, a slow, grinding journey from the frantic, vertical energy of the city into the flat, horizontal quiet of the countryside. I'd spent my entire life surrounded by noise, by the constant hum of people and traffic, the shouts in the yard, the clanging of doors. The further the bus got from the city, the more the silence began to press in on me. I watched the landscape change through the grimy window. Concrete and steel gave way to suburbs, then to strip malls, then to wide, empty fields lying dormant under the gray October sky. The trees were bare, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the clouds. It felt like I was traveling not just across the state, but back in time. I had the small wooden box on my lap, my hand resting on it. The $400 was now $280 after the one-way ticket. It was a reckless, stupid gamble, and every mile the bus traveled, the voice of Ms. Albright echoed in my head. Walk away, start fresh. But what was fresh? A room in a boarding house, a job washing dishes, a life built on the foundation of being unwanted? I had tried to imagine that future, and all I could see was a long gray hallway, indistinguishable from the ones I'd just left. This, at least, was a direction. It was a question mark, but it was my question mark. I hadn't opened the small, sealed envelope yet. I was saving it. It felt like the last piece, the one you save for the very end. For now, the key was enough. The deed was enough. They were tangible proof that another story existed. The journey took 8 hours. The sun was setting by the time the bus wheezed to a stop in a town called Port Henry. It wasn't Sparrow Creek, but it was the closest stop. The town was a handful of streets huddled by the edge of a vast, dark lake. The air that hit me when the doors opened was different. It was clean, cold, and smelled of water and wood smoke. It felt ancient. There were no taxis, no Ubers, just a single gas station with a convenience store attached, its fluorescent lights a lonely beacon in the deepening twilight. The man behind the counter was old, his face a road map of wrinkles. He looked me up and down, taking in my city clothes and the box I was clutching. "You're not from around here," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm trying to get to a place called Sparrow Creek," I told him. He grunted. "Sparrow Creek ain't a place anymore. It's just a road. Used to be a little hamlet back in the day, but the mill closed. People moved on." "There's a property," I said. 14 Sparrow Creek Lane." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned forward. "Vance property. That place has been empty for 20 years. You a relation?" "Her grandson," I said, the words feeling strange and heavy in my mouth. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "You got her eyes," he said finally. "Figured someone would come for it eventually, though I figured it'd be the bank, not family." He told me the road was 5 miles out of town, mostly unpaved. No one would be heading that way at this hour. He pointed me toward a diner across the street. "Get a room for the night at the inn above it. In the morning I'll have my boy give you a lift. He makes a delivery out that way." The room was small, clean, and suffocatingly quiet. The floorboards creaked. The wind howled outside the single window. I lay on the bed, my box beside me, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. I was an archaeologist about to break the seal on a tomb, and I was terrified of what I might find. Was it just a ruin and a debt, as Ms. Albright had warned? Was this whole trip a fool's errand, a final, desperate attempt to find meaning where there was none? I thought about the kids I grew up with. Some of them had stories. A parent in jail, a mother who was sick. Their histories were sad, but they were histories. They were connected to something. My story was a blank page, with a single sentence written at the top. You were not wanted. This property, this key, it was a chance to write something else on that page, even if it was just an ending. The next morning, the old man's son, a quiet guy named Mike in a dusty pickup truck, drove me out of town. He didn't talk much, which I was grateful for. The paved road turned to gravel, then to a dirt track flanked by dense, dark woods. After about 15 minutes, he slowed the truck. "This is it," he said, pointing to a break in the trees. A rusted, wrought-iron gate hung crookedly from a stone pillar. One half was missing entirely. Beyond it, a dirt driveway, barely visible beneath a carpet of fallen leaves, snaked into the woods. "House is up ahead. Can't see it from the road," he said. "You sure about this? Place gives me the creeps." "I'm sure," I said. He shrugged, put the truck in park, and helped me with my box. "Well, good luck to you," he said, his expression a mixture of pity and curiosity. He got back in his truck and drove away, the sound of the engine fading until it was swallowed by the immense silence of the woods. And then I was alone. The air was still and cold. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in a faint breeze. I pushed the broken gate open further. It groaned in protest. I walked up the driveway. The leaves crunched under my feet, the sound unnervingly loud. After about 100 yards, the trees opened up, and I saw it. The house wasn't large. It was a simple, 2-story farmhouse with a wide, sagging porch. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood a silvery, weathered gray. The windows were dark and empty, like vacant eyes. To the left stood the skeleton of a barn, its roof caved in, its walls leaning at an impossible angle. The whole place looked like it was slowly being reclaimed by the forest, pulled back into the earth. It was derelict. It was a ruin. But it was also beautiful. It didn't feel menacing. It felt sad, like it was waiting for someone. I walked up the 3 steps to the porch. They creaked under my weight, but held. The front door was painted a faded blue, a single splash of color in a world of gray and brown. The keyhole was dark with rust. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the door. This was it, the threshold. Behind this door lay either answers or a final, crushing disappointment. My hand was shaking again as I pulled the heavy iron key from my pocket. I slid it into the lock. It was stiff, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought it wouldn't turn. It was all a mistake. The key was for something else, some other lock, some other life. I put my other hand on it, took a deep breath, and turned with all my strength. There was a loud, grating crack as years of rust and neglect gave way. The lock clicked. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I turned the knob, pushed, and the door swung inward with a low, mournful groan, opening into darkness. The air that rushed out to meet me was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time. It was a cocktail of dust, decaying paper, damp wood, and something else, something faintly floral, like dried lavender. I stepped inside, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. The door swung shut behind me with a soft thud, plunging me into near-total darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. For a second, a primal fear, the kind that makes the hair on your arm stand up, washed over me. I was in a tomb. I was trespassing. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut a sharp white cone through the darkness, illuminating a blizzard of dust motes dancing in the air. I was standing in a small entryway. To my left, a staircase with a carved wooden banister led up into more darkness. In front of me was a wide archway leading into what looked like a living room. I swept the light across the room. Everything was covered in a thick, uniform layer of gray dust, as if a soft, silent snow had been falling for 2 decades. Furniture huddled under white sheets, their shapes like sleeping, prehistoric animals. A grand stone fireplace dominated the far wall, its hearth filled with the blackened remains of a long dead fire. A stack of logs sat beside it, untouched. It was a perfect, frozen moment. It was as if someone had just stepped out for a moment and never come back. I walked slowly into the room, my footsteps eerily silent on the thick carpet of dust. I touched the sheet covering a large sofa. The fabric was cold and brittle. I felt like an intruder in a museum, or a ghost haunting my own past. My past. Was this my past? I had no memories of this place, no flicker of recognition. I was a stranger here. I drifted from room to room on the ground floor. A dining room with a long table and 8 chairs, all shrouded. A kitchen, where the light from the grimy window revealed peeling linoleum and countertops bare, except for a single, dust-covered mug sitting by the sink. It was all so normal, so domestic. It was the kind of home I used to see in pictures, the kind I used to imagine for myself when I was a kid, lying in my bunk in the dark. A place with a kitchen and a fireplace and a family. Seeing it like this, empty and abandoned, felt like a special kind of cruelty. I went back to the living room, drawn to the fireplace. It felt like the heart of the house. I sat on the dusty floor in front of it, the beam of my phone's light casting long, dancing shadows. I pulled the small, cream-colored envelope from my pocket. My name on the front. Leo. My hands were steady now. The fear had subsided, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. I had come this far. There was no turning back. I carefully broke the brittle seal. Inside was not a long letter, as I had expected. It was a single piece of folded notepaper and another, much smaller, brass key. I unfolded the paper. The same elegant, looping handwriting. The message was short, cryptic. The heart of the house holds the heart of the matter. Forgive me. E. The heart of the house. I looked at the massive stone fireplace in front of me. The hearth. Of course. It was a cliché, something out of a book, but it felt right. I ran my hands over the cold stones around the fireplace opening. They were solid, seamless. I pushed on them, looking for a loose one. Nothing. I was about to give up, to think I'd misunderstood, when my light caught something on the hearth itself. A single stone, darker than the others, with a small, almost invisible chip on its edge. It was just different enough. I knelt down and pressed my fingers into the grout around it. It was looser than the rest. I dug my nails in, pulling. The stone resisted, then shifted with a scraping sound. It came free in my hand. Behind it was a dark, rectangular cavity, just big enough to fit a small box. And inside that cavity was a metal box, black and rusted at the hinges. It had a small, simple lock. My breath caught in my throat. I picked up the small brass key that had been in the envelope. With a trembling hand, I inserted it into the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it. The lock clicked open. I lifted the lid. The box was filled to the brim. On top were thick bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbon and organized by year. Beneath them, I could see stacks of currency. Not just a few bills, thick, dense wads of cash held together with old rubber bands. It was a fortune. I didn't touch the money. My eyes were fixed on the letters. The top bundle was labeled in that same script, Year 1. I gently lifted it out. The first letter was dated just a few weeks after I was born. My hands shook as I unfolded the delicate pages. The ink was clear, the words stark against the cream paper. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, "I am writing this even though you will not read it for a very, very long time. Perhaps never. I am writing because I need to record the truth, even if it only ever exists in this box, buried in the heart of this house. If you are reading this, it means two things. It means I am gone, and it means you have come home." I had to stop. I closed my eyes, the words burning behind my eyelids. You have come home. I took a ragged breath and continued reading. Today, I did the hardest thing I will ever do. I left you. I drove to the city and I walked into a building I never wanted to see, and I handed you, my perfect, beautiful grandson, to a stranger. They have a story all prepared. They will say your parents are gone, which is true. They will say your grandmother, Ilara Vance, has abandoned you, which is the most profound lie ever told. I am not abandoning you, my love. I am hiding you. The letter went on to explain, in clear, heartbreaking detail, my parents, her son and his wife, hadn't just died in a car accident. They had gotten involved with dangerous people. My father, a gifted accountant, had been doing bookkeeping for a criminal syndicate. He thought he could handle it, that he was smarter than them. He was wrong. He had discovered the depth of their crimes, money laundering, extortion, worse, and he had decided to get out, to go to the police. But he made a mistake. He told them. He tried to use his knowledge as leverage to protect his family. They responded by running my parents' car off a mountain road. It wasn't an accident. It was an execution. They didn't get what they were looking for, the letter continued. Before he died, my son told me he had hidden a failsafe. Copies of all their records, all their crimes. He told me they would come looking for it. And they did. The day after the funeral, 2 men came to this house. They were not police. They were polite, but their eyes were cold. They were looking for my son's files. They thought I knew where they were. I didn't. But I knew then that as long as you were with me, you were a target. You were their leverage. I couldn't run forever. I couldn't protect you. They are powerful, and I am just one woman. So I made a choice. I chose to become a ghost. I surrendered you to the one place they would never think to look for a child they believed was a valuable bargaining chip. The anonymous, bureaucratic maze of the state care system. I created a false trail, made it look like I fled the country with what little money I had. I became, on paper, a selfish, grieving woman who couldn't handle the burden of a child. It was the only way to make you safe, to make you invisible. I dropped the letter. My whole body was shaking, not from cold, but from the shock of it. 20 years. 20 years of believing I was abandoned, thrown away. 20 years of carrying that weight, of letting it define me. And it was all a lie. A lie constructed to save my life. A lie told by a woman who had sacrificed everything. I looked around the dusty, silent room. This wasn't a place of abandonment. This was a sanctuary. This was a fortress. I picked up the next letter, and the next. They were a diary, a chronicle of her lonely life after she'd given me up. She had never left. She had stayed right here, in this house, living like a hermit, saving every penny she could, putting it in this box. For me. She wrote about the changing seasons, the garden she kept, the quiet ache of my absence. She wrote to me on my birthdays, imagining what I looked like, what my voice sounded like. "You are 5 today," one letter read. "I baked a small cake. I wonder if you like chocolate." Another, years later. "I saw a boy in town today who must be your age. He had your father's walk. My heart ached so much I had to sit down on a bench. I cried. I sat on the floor of my grandmother's house, in a cloud of dust, and I cried for the first time since I was a small child. I cried for the baby left with strangers. I cried for the boy who grew up believing he was worthless. But mostly, I cried for her, for Ilara Vance, the grandmother I never knew, who had loved me so much she had erased herself from my life to grant me my own. It was a love so fierce and so complete, it had masqueraded as abandonment for 20 years. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight in my chest. But beneath the grief, something else was stirring. A slow, burning anger. An anger at the people who had taken my parents, who had forced my grandmother into this impossible choice, and a dawning, terrifying sense of responsibility. I looked at the money in the box, and then I remembered the letter from Pioneer Development, the $57,000 debt, the 1-week deadline. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. This wasn't just about a tax lien. This was about them. They were still looking. After 20 years, they were still looking for what my father had hidden. And Pioneer Development was their tool. They weren't trying to collect a debt. They were trying to seize the land, to finally get their hands on it so they could tear it apart and find my father's secret. My grandmother had given me 2 things in this box: the story of my past and a choice about my future. The money was my escape. It was enough to pay the debt and have a substantial amount left over. Or it was enough to just disappear. I could take the cash, walk away from this house, this story, this fight. I could start that fresh life Ms. Albright had talked about. No one would blame me. My grandmother's own words echoed in my mind. Forgive me. She was asking forgiveness for putting this burden on me. The choice. To run or to fight. To be free or to be right. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, the dust settling around me, the silence of the house pressing in. The initial shock had passed, leaving behind a hollow space inside me. The story of my life had been rewritten in the span of an afternoon. I wasn't an orphan because I was unwanted. I was an orphan because I was loved too much. The thought was so immense, so world-altering, that my mind could barely contain it. My entire identity, built on the shifting sands of abandonment, had crumbled. And I didn't know who I was supposed to be in its place. Am I the boy who was saved? Or am I the man who has to finish the fight? I looked at the contents of the box again. The letters, a testament to a grandmother's fierce, hidden love. And the money. So much money. I'd never seen anything like it. It was a physical manifestation of her sacrifice, years of scrimping and saving, all for me. It was a ticket to anywhere. I could walk out of this house, leave the key on the table, and never look back. I could buy a car, rent an apartment in a city where no one knew my name. I could go to college. I could be normal. The thought was intoxicating. It was a siren song, promising a life free from ghosts and debts and dangerous, faceless men. A life without the weight of this house, this land, this story. It was everything I had ever dreamed of in the lonely quiet of the group home. Why shouldn't I take it? She saved me. She gave me this chance. Her letters were full of hope for my future, a future she bought for me at the cost of her own. Wouldn't taking the money and living a full, happy life be the ultimate tribute to her sacrifice? But then I looked around the room, at the sheet-draped furniture, at the cold hearth. This house wasn't just a property. It was her. It was the last piece of her left in the world. It was a monument to her love and her pain. Letting Pioneer Development take it felt like letting them win. It felt like letting them desecrate her grave. It felt like betraying her all over again. The anger I'd felt earlier returned, a low, steady burn. These people, this syndicate, this Pioneer Development, they were not just a faceless corporation on a letterhead. They were the architects of my entire life's tragedy. They took my parents. They forced my grandmother into a living death of solitude and grief. They made me an orphan. And now, after all that, they were coming for the last thing my family had. This small patch of earth, this broken-down house. My inheritance. Not the money, the home, the story. What would she want me to do? Her letters were full of love and longing, but underneath it all, there was a spine of steel. The woman who made this choice, who lived this life, she wasn't a victim. She was a fighter. She fought in the only way she could, with silence and patience and cunning. She hid me, and she left me this arsenal: the truth, the money, and the choice. The final letter in the box, the one I hadn't read yet, was in a separate sealed envelope. It was thicker than the others. The front simply said, "For when you are ready to choose." I think this is a good moment to pause, because what I was feeling in that dusty room is something I think a lot of us have to face at some point. It's that moment when you realize your life is no longer just happening to you. It's the moment you're handed a choice that will define who you are, not just what's been done to you. Have you ever had a moment like that? A crossroads, where the easy path and the right path are two very different roads. If this is hitting home for you, if you've ever had to stare down your own past and make a choice that scared you to death, let me know in the comments. You're not alone in this. This community is for people who get it. And if you're finding value in this story, please consider subscribing. Your support means I can keep sharing these stories. Stories about finding our strength when we thought we had none left. Now let's get back to the house and to the final letter. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that reading it would be the point of no return. My fingers were trembling as I broke the seal. This letter was different. The handwriting was the same, but it was shakier, the lines less certain. It was dated a little over a year ago. It was her last will and testament, not in a legal sense, but in a moral one. "My dearest boy," it began, "if you are reading this, my time is over, and your time is beginning. I feel it in my bones. This old house and I are getting tired together. There are things I have not told you in the other letters, truths I shielded you from, because they are heavy, and I wanted you to have a choice unburdened by duty. But if you have chosen to read this, you are asking for the burden. So here it is." She confirmed my suspicions. Pioneer Development was a front. She had been watching them for years. They'd been buying up properties in the area, using legal loopholes and financial pressure. But hers was the one they truly wanted. Your father was not just a bookkeeper, Leo. He was a good man who made a bad decision and then tried to make it right. Before he and your mother died, he told me what he had done. He didn't just have copies of their financial ledgers. He had everything. Names, dates, secret accounts, records of their intimidation tactics. It was a complete anatomy of their criminal enterprise. He called it his confession and his penance. He hid it, not in the house. They searched the house top to bottom after I left. They were thorough. He hid it on the property. He was clever, your father. He knew they would think in terms of safes and secret rooms. He thought in terms of the land itself. The letter went on, her words painting a picture of my father I'd never had. Not just a victim, but a man of conscience trapped in a terrible situation, trying to claw his way back to the light. And he had left a weapon behind. "The money in the box is for you," she wrote. "It is clean. It is my savings, my pension, the sale of my jewelry. It is for you to live. I want you to live, Leo. I want you to be happy and free. You can take that money and you can walk away from here, and you will have my blessing." That is one kind of freedom. But there is another kind. The kind that comes from justice. The kind that comes from finishing what your father started. From giving our family peace. The final paragraph was a direct challenge. A torch being passed. He told me where he hid the box. He said, "Tell Leo to look where the horses sleep, beneath the fallen star." It meant nothing to me for years, but I think I've figured it out, and I think you can too. The choice is yours, my brave boy, to be free or to be right. Whatever you choose, know that you were loved every single day. Your grandmother, Ilara. I folded the letter. The choice was no longer abstract. It had a name, a place, a purpose. Where the horses sleep, beneath the fallen star. The barn. The collapsing, ruined barn. A fallen star. It took me a minute. A star. A brand. A white mark on a horse's forehead. A fallen star. A horse that was no longer there. I stood up, my body stiff from sitting on the cold floor. The grief and confusion were still there, but now they had a core of something hard and clear. Purpose. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't that scared, lonely kid from the group home anymore. I was Ilara Vance's grandson, and I was home. The fight was just beginning. My first move was to call the only ally I had in the world, Ms. Albright. I walked out onto the sagging porch, my phone feeling like a lifeline to the world I had just left. The signal was weak, a single flickering bar. I paced back and forth, holding the phone up to the gray sky, until it finally connected. Her voice was tinny, worried. "Leo, my God, are you all right? Where are you?" "I'm here," I said, my own voice sounding strange to me, stronger than I expected. "At the house." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Leo, I told you—" "You were right," I interrupted. "It's a ruin, and there's a debt. But you were wrong about the rest of it. She didn't abandon me, Ms. Albright. She saved me." I spent the next 20 minutes telling her everything. The box, the letters, my parents, the criminal network, pioneer development. I told her about the hidden ledgers. As I spoke, I could feel the stories solidifying, becoming real. It wasn't just a collection of dusty letters anymore. It was a fact. It was my fact. When I finished, the silence on the line was different. It wasn't worried anymore. It was heavy with contemplation. Mrs. Albright had spent her life navigating systems, dealing with broken families and tangled lies. She knew the truth when she heard it. "Okay," she said, her tone all business now. The pragmatic social worker was back, but this time she was on my side. "Okay, Leo, first thing, do not contact Pioneer Development. Do not answer any calls from numbers you don't know. Don't talk to anyone who might show up at the property. You are in a very dangerous position." "I know," I said, "but I have the money. I can pay the tax lien. I have until the end of the week." "No," she said sharply, "you will not do that. That's what they want. They want you to engage. They want to know who you are. Right now, you are a ghost to them, just like your grandmother was, a name on a deed. The moment you walk into that county office with a bag of cash, you become a person, a target. We need to be smarter than that. Her calm, methodical approach was a lifeline. My anger and grief were a fire, but she was the one who could help me forge it into a weapon. "What do we do?" I asked. "We need a lawyer," she said. "Not just any lawyer. Someone who understands this kind of thing. Someone who won't be intimidated. I know a guy. He runs a non-profit that deals with corporate malfeasance and organized crime cases. He owes me a favor. His name is David Davies. I'll call him. You stay put. And Leo, find that box. But for God's sake, be careful." The call ended, and I was alone again, but not entirely. I had a plan. I had an ally, and I had a riddle to solve. Where the horses sleep, beneath the fallen star. I walked toward the barn. It was in even worse shape up close than it was from the house. The roof had caved in on one side, leaving a gaping hole to the sky. The huge sliding doors had fallen off their runners and lay half buried in weeds and mud. The whole structure leaned, groaning with every gust of wind, looking like one strong storm would bring it all down. I squeezed through a gap in the wall. The inside smelled of hay, rot, and rain. Light streamed in through the hole in the roof, illuminating a chaotic scene of collapsed beams, broken equipment, and thick green moss growing over everything. There were 4 stalls on the far side, their wooden doors hanging from single hinges, where the horses sleep. I made my way over to the stalls, my feet sinking into the soft, damp earth of the floor. 3 of the stalls were empty, filled with debris. But the 4th one, the one on the end, was different. Nailed to the front of it was a small wooden plaque, so weathered the writing was almost illegible. I ran my fingers over it, clearing away the grime. I could just make out the name carved into the wood. Stardust. A fallen star. My heart was pounding. This was it. I pushed the stall door, which fell off its last hinge and crashed to the ground. The stall was empty, but the floor was different from the others. Instead of packed earth, it was covered with heavy oak floorboards. They were warped and swollen from years of damp, but they were solid. I got down on my hands and knees, running my flashlight over the wood. I was looking for a seam, a handle, a sign of a trap door. Nothing. The boards were seamless. I remembered my father's cleverness, what my grandmother had written. He wouldn't think in terms of simple trap doors. I thought about the riddle again. Beneath the fallen star. Not just in the stall named Stardust, beneath the horse itself. I paced the small enclosure. A horse would stand in the middle of the stall. I stood where I imagined its center of mass would be. I stomped my foot. The sound was a dull thud. I moved a few feet to the left and stomped again. Thud. I moved to the front of the stall, near where the feed trough would have been. I stomped. This time, the sound was different, a hollow echo. I knelt down again, examining the boards in that spot more closely. I ran my fingers along the edges. One board seemed to have a slightly wider gap around it than the others. I took out my pocket knife, a cheap thing I had had for years, and wedged the tip into the gap. I pried. The wood groaned. I put all my weight into it, and with a splintering crack, the board lifted. It wasn't a trap door. It was just a single, removable plank. And beneath it, nestled in the dark, dry earth, was another metal box. This one was larger than the one in the house, a military-style ammunition can, painted olive drab. It was heavy. I lifted it out of the hole and carried it back to the house, my mind racing. This was my father's secret, his confession and his penance. I set the box on the dusty dining room table. There were 2 latches on the front. They weren't locked. I took a deep breath, and I opened them. It wasn't filled with money. It was filled with paper. Stacks of accounting ledgers, their columns filled with my father's neat, precise handwriting. Bundles of receipts and invoices held together with paper clips that were now just flakes of rust. There were floppy disks, actual floppy disks from the 1990s. And there was a cassette tape, the kind for a micro recorder, labeled with a single word: testimony. This was it. The entire criminal history of a powerful organization, compiled by the man who knew it best. It was a bomb, and I was holding the detonator. My phone rang, making me jump. It was an unknown number. My first instinct was to follow Ms. Albright's advice and ignore it. But something told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Is this Leo Vance?" The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, and deeply unsettling. It was the kind of voice that never needed to be raised. "We understand you've taken an interest in a property previously owned by your grandmother, the one at 14 Sparrow Creek Lane." It was them, Pioneer Development, or whoever was behind them. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's just say we are the inheritors of your father's business arrangements," the voice said. "And we have a proposition for you. That property is a liability. It's worthless. But we are prepared to be generous. We will forgive the entire tax debt, and we will pay you $100,000 in cash for the deed. You sign it over, you walk away, and this chapter of your family's unfortunate history is closed for good." It was a test and a threat. They were offering me an easy way out, but the unspoken part of the offer was clear: take the deal or else. They didn't know I had found the box. They were just trying to buy the land, to get to the prize they assumed was still buried. $100,000. On top of the money my grandmother had left me. It was a fortune. It was a life-changing amount of money. For a moment, the siren song returned. Take it. Run. Be rich. Be safe. Be free. But I looked at the box on the table. My father's penance. My grandmother's sacrifice. My entire life shaped by the actions of the man on the other end of this phone. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it felt like a rock. "I'm sorry?" the voice asked, a hint of surprise in his tone. "The property is not for sale," I said, and I hung up the phone. The adrenaline was pumping through me so hard I felt dizzy. I had just declared war. The choice was made. There was no going back now. My phone buzzed again. A text from Ms. Albright. "Davies is in. He's one of the best. He'll call you in the morning. He says to sit tight and touch nothing." I looked at the ammunition can. Touch nothing. Too late for that. But as I stood there, in the silence of my family's home, surrounded by the ghosts of their choices, I didn't feel scared. I felt ready. The next morning would bring the lawyers and the start of a new, more complicated battle. But for the rest of that day, I did something else. I started to clean. I found a broom in a closet, and I began to sweep. I swept away the dust of 20 years, not to erase the past, but to make room for the future. My future, in my house. The call from David Davies came at 9 o'clock the next morning, sharp. His voice was the opposite of the man from Pioneer Development. It was gravelly, impatient, and utterly unimpressed by anything. "Albright filled me in," he said, dispensing with any pleasantries. "Sounds like you've stepped in it, kid." "It feels that way," I admitted. "Good. Don't get cocky. Cocky gets you dead," he grunted. Now tell me exactly what you have. Don't summarize. I want an inventory. Every ledger, every piece of paper, every disc. I spent the next hour on the phone with him, sitting at the dining room table, carefully describing the contents of the ammo can. He listened without interruption, the only sound on his end the occasional scratch of a pen. When I got to the microcassette labeled Testimony, he finally spoke. "That's the ball game," he said, a new energy in his voice. "The paper trail is one thing, it's damning, but a narrative from the inside, from your father? That's the kind of thing that gets indictments. That's the human element." He explained the strategy. It was simple and brilliant. We weren't going to sue Pioneer Development. We weren't going to engage with them at all. We were going to go over their heads, straight to the FBI. These guys, this syndicate, they've been operating for decades by staying in the shadows, using fronts and shell corporations, Davies explained. They're experts at manipulating the civil court system. They'd tie us up in litigation for years, bleed you dry, and bury us in paperwork. We're not playing their game. We're flipping the whole table. He told me he had contacts in the Bureau's white-collar crime and organized crime divisions. He would act as my legal counsel, an intermediary. We would hand over everything, anonymously at first. The evidence would be presented as coming from a confidential informant. My name would be kept out of it for as long as possible, for my own protection. "What about the house?" I asked. "The tax lien. I still have to pay that." "Yes, but not yet," he said. "Let me make a few calls first. I'm going to talk to the county tax assessor. I'm going to talk to the U.S. Attorney's office. We're going to put a freeze on that property, but not in a way they expect. We're going to declare it a potential site in an ongoing federal investigation. Pioneer won't be able to touch it. The county won't be able to seize it. It'll be in legal limbo, which is exactly where we want it." It was a masterful plan. It used the system against itself. It was the kind of clever, strategic thinking my grandmother would have appreciated. The next few days were a blur of activity, all conducted from the quiet isolation of the house. Davies arranged for a bonded courier, a retired state trooper, to come and collect the ammo can. Handing it over was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. It felt like giving away the last piece of my father. But Davies was firm. "It's not yours to keep, kid. It belongs to the justice system now. Your job was to find it. My job is to use it. Now you have a new job. Stay alive and stay quiet." So I did. I stayed in the house. I kept cleaning. I found old cleaning supplies under the sink that still worked. I washed the windows, letting sunlight stream into the house for the first time in a generation. The light changed everything. It chased the ghosts out of the corners, made the place feel less like a tomb and more like a home that had just been sleeping. I found my grandmother's bedroom upstairs. It was simple, neat. A bed, a dresser, a nightstand. On the nightstand was a book of poetry and a framed photograph, face down. I picked it up. It was a picture of a young couple, laughing, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. My parents. And me. I stared at their faces, faces I had only ever seen in blurry photocopies in my file. Here, they were alive, vibrant, happy. My father had his arm around my mother, and he was looking at her with so much love it was almost painful to see. My mother was looking down at me, her face glowing. I finally knew what they looked like. I put the photograph on the dresser, upright. While the legal battle raged on in a world far away, my own battle was quieter. It was a fight against decay, against time. I learned how to patch a leaky faucet from a video I downloaded on the spotty internet. I learned which floorboards creaked and which were solid. I explored the woods around the property, finding old stone walls and the remnants of a garden my grandmother had kept. The land was beautiful, wild, and resilient. It was a part of me. A week after I gave the evidence to the courier, I got a call from Davies. "It's done," he said. "The U.S. Attorney is convening a grand jury. They've issued subpoenas to Pioneer Development and a dozen other companies. They've frozen their assets. The hornet's nest has been kicked." "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means they're too busy trying to save their own skins to worry about you or a derelict farmhouse. You're safe, for now. And I got the county to put a stay on the tax foreclosure pending the federal investigation. You have time." He also told me they had digitized the microcassette. My father's voice. He asked if I wanted to hear it. I said no, not yet. I wasn't ready for that ghost, not yet. Armed with the knowledge that I was safe, I finally went into town. I walked the 5 miles down the dirt road, feeling the sun on my face. The town of Port Henry looked different in the daylight. Less lonely, more settled. I went to the hardware store to buy nails and wood putty. The woman behind the counter had sharp, curious eyes. "You're the Vance boy," she said. "Staying out at the old place. Heard you were fixing it up." News traveled fast in a small town. "I'm trying," I said. "Good," she said, nodding. "That place deserves to have life in it again." Ilara was a good woman. Quiet, but good. She told me about my grandmother. Small things. How she always bought the same brand of tea at the general store. How she would sometimes leave anonymous bags of vegetables from her garden on the church steps. She was painting a portrait for me, filling in the gaps the letters had left. I wasn't just Ilara Vance's grandson anymore. I was Leo, the boy who was fixing up the Vance place. I used the money from the box in the hearth, my grandmother's money, to pay for the supplies. And then I walked to the county records office, not to pay the whole lien, but to make a statement. I paid $1,000 of it, a down payment, a claim. The clerk, a tired-looking man, stamped my receipt. "This is a big debt, son," he said, looking at me over his glasses. "You sure you want to take it on?" I looked at the receipt in my hand. My name, my address, 14 Sparrow Creek Lane. "It's my home," I said, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a lie or a hope or a fight. It just felt like the truth. The work was slow. The consequences of my choice weren't a dramatic courtroom showdown, but the daily, aching reality of hard labor. I spent the winter in the house. It was cold. I learned how to build a fire in the fireplace, the same fireplace where I'd found the letters. The warmth from it felt like a connection to her. I bought a small generator and ran extension cords, giving myself light and a little power. I fixed the worst of the leaks in the roof, patching it from the inside as best I could. The barn was a lost cause for now, but the house was coming back to life. It was breathing again, and so was I. The town began to accept me. Mike, the man who had given me a ride, would drop off supplies for me. The woman from the hardware store, her name was Sarah, would give me discounts. The old man at the gas station would just nod at me when I came in, a silent acknowledgement. They weren't my family, but they were a community. They were the roots I never had, slowly, tentatively taking hold in this new soil. One day in early spring, a package arrived. It was from Davies. Inside was a single CD and a note. "The investigation is proceeding. Indictments are expected within the month. I thought you might be ready for this now." It was the recording of my father's testimony. I held it in my hand for a long time. I had a small portable CD player I'd bought. I took it out to the porch. The sun was warm, the trees were budding. The world felt new. I put the CD in, put on the headphones, and pressed play. And for the first time, I heard my father's voice. It was calm, steady, and full of a terrible sadness. He wasn't just listing numbers and names. He was telling a story, his story. A story of regret, of wanting to do the right thing, of his love for his family. "I am doing this for my son," his voice said, cracking with emotion, "so that he can one day know that his father, whatever his mistakes, tried to make things right. So that he can live in a world free of this darkness. I hope he will be proud of me." I sat on that porch and listened to the entire thing, and I finally understood. The inheritance wasn't the house. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the truth. It was this choice. The choice to stand for something. The choice to finish the story my father and grandmother had started. The consequence of my choice wasn't victory. It was work. It was peace. It was home. Months turned into a year. The federal case against the syndicate behind Pioneer Development became a massive, sprawling thing. Names I read in the news, powerful men in expensive suits, were linked to the evidence my father had collected. Their empire, built in the shadows, was being dismantled in the bright glare of public scrutiny. My name was never mentioned. I remained the anonymous informant, a ghost in the machine, just as Davies had planned. He called me occasionally with updates, his gruff voice a comforting presence. The legal pressure on the property vanished. The liens were formally dropped as part of the federal seizure of the syndicate's assets. The house was mine, free and clear. But ownership was never the point. The point was the quiet mornings, the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen I had slowly rebuilt. The point was the ache in my muscles after a day of clearing brush or replacing a rotten window frame. I had started work on the barn, stabilizing the structure, clearing the debris. It was a Herculean task, but I had time. I had the rest of my life. I never became a rich man. Most of my grandmother's money went into the house. Taxes, materials, tools. I bought a used truck, the same model as Mike's. I took odd jobs in town, helping Sarah at the hardware store, doing landscaping for some of the summer residents. I was no longer a ward of the state or a mysterious recluse. I was just Leo, the guy from the Vance place, a part of the town. One evening I was sitting on the porch, watching the fireflies begin to rise from the fields. The house behind me was no longer a ruin. It was scarred, imperfect, but it was solid. It was warm. There were lights in the windows. My lights. I thought about the boy who had stood outside the group home, clutching a cardboard box, feeling like the world had ended. He had no past and no future. He was so lost. It felt like a lifetime ago. I realized then that my grandmother's gift wasn't the house or the money. It was the journey to it. She didn't just give me a home. She gave me the chance to earn it, to build it, to choose it. Home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you make. It's the story you decide to write for yourself. The anger I had felt was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet gratitude. The grief for my parents and grandmother was still there, a soft ache that I knew would never fully disappear. But it wasn't a wound anymore. It was a part of me, like the color of my eyes or the shape of my hands. It was the foundation on which I had built this new life. This is the lesson I wanted to share with you all. The story that gets written for us in the beginning. The story of where we come from, of what we've lost, of who people think we are. That's just the first chapter. It's not the whole book. We get to pick up the pen. We get to decide what comes next. We can't erase the past, but we can build a future that gives it meaning. My grandmother thought she was giving me a choice between being free and being right. But I think she knew, in her heart, that for me, the only way to be truly free was to do what was right. To reclaim my family's story and make it my own. The house is quiet now, but it's not empty. It's filled with the memories of those who came before and the promise of the life that is yet to come. It's not just a structure of wood and stone anymore. It's a testament to the idea that even after the deepest loss, you can rebuild. That you can find your way home, even if it's to a place you've never been before. And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? We all have our own version of that abandoned house. A part of our lives, our history, or our hearts that we've been told is a lost cause, a ruin not worth saving. A story of abandonment we've told ourselves so many times we believe it's the only truth. But what if it's not? What if, buried under all that dust and neglect, there's a key, a letter, a reason to fight? What if the thing we thought was our greatest weakness is actually the source of our greatest strength? I want to thank you for listening, for taking this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own story and the chapters you still have to write, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I read every single comment and I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments below. Tell me about a time you chose the harder path. Tell me about how you found your way home. This isn't just my story, it's a conversation. It's a community of people who understand that sometimes you have to go back to the beginning to find your real start. Thank you for being a part of it.